Hi students, I wanted to show you what you're going to need to start the process of setting up your palette. Your palette will be clean and fresh and brand new with a lid. Mine is old and stained and I cleaned one of them out, and I'm going to demonstrate the process. So everything's measured out. We've done the measurements for both the wheel and the project number 2. And by now everybody should have the correct materials. This palette I find the best because it's got one giant area for mixing inside. I don't particularly like it when it's broken up, but that's a backup version of the palette if this one is out of order, or out of stock. But since we've had plenty of time to order, everyone should be at this stage and ready to go. So you have your palette, and it should have a whole bunch of wells along the side and a giant mixing area. You never want to use a tiny little pocket size watercolor kit. It just doesn't work. This is plenty good for traveling and working outside. You don't need those itty bitties, and they just don't work. You also don't want to work with tiny little brushes and tiny little kits because it shows when you're painting. You're limited in technique. Anyway, I don't want to go on about that, but I wanted to show you what the process is. We have our cadmium yellow medium. I made sure you had 2 extras. Plan to use at least 1 for this process. A lot of times you'll use 1.5. You also will have your cadmium red medium. You probably will go through, I don't know, 2/3 of a tube in one semester. Ultramarine blue, you might go through half. But it varies. As long as the hues are correct, you can't overload. You can underload. Most people underload. They don't get enough pigment in there. They're very chintzy about how much is in there. Since we're going to be chintzy with paint in terms of compared to water, at this point we want to be generous. You want to create piles that will sustain you throughout the semester. You don't want to be reaching for tubes while you're working. You want to just be reaching for your wells. So we're basically setting you up for the rest of the entire semester. So this is really important. Everything we do relates to color theory, and that relates to the wheel, and that relates to the palette. So we're actually building a value scale out of paint and temperature, and we're going to end up with 14 wells. Now they're not going to be filled to the top, but they're going to be substantial, especially at the top of the wheel. Once you have your wells, you can use these colors for years and years and years. Even if you're moving, it turns upside down, and the paint dries and falls off, you can just pick up the paint, put it back in the well, and reuse it. It's definitely more pleasant to have it fresh. But basically what I'm saying is, with a lid and with these good mixing at the beginning, you're just set up for a long time. So this part is key. Alright, so besides your cadmium yellow medium, your cadmium red medium, your ultramarine blue, specifically these, you also have your lamp black. That's it. 4 tubes. 3 of yellow and then 1 of each of the other. Yellow is the weakest, lightest, most vulnerable hue. Red is a middle value. So in a color wheel, this would be at the top of the wheel, almost white. This would be a middle value. And then when you get down to ultramarine, you're at a darker value. So this is very light, weak. This is medium, average. This is strong, dark. So you don't use much of this. And then of course black we barely use. Black is one of those colors that you can get away with never using in any medium, because unless it's just a black and white painting or ink, but it's pretty powerful, and it's basically designed to create shades of these other colors or shades of neutrals. It's going to play a role, but it's not as strong as the color wheel itself. Anyway, so light, medium, dark, darkest, and we are going to invent everything else. Primaries exist. They're the only things that basically exist in nature. From those we make everything else. There will be some exceptions. You look at a beet, or you look at a red, something red, like real juicy red pomegranate, something really bright. You do see neons and purples and magentas in nature, and even neons, but basically we're talking about these. They're the only things that exist in and of themselves that aren't made by anything else. And so from these, we're going to use the subtractive color mixing method. Subtractive is used anytime you work on paper or a surface. Additive is if you work on a computer or TV or lights, where it's a whole different process of how you see light through color. This is subtractive, and that is defined by primaries. So we're going to use our primaries to create tertiaries, which are the in-betweens, as well as secondaries, which are the every others. And we're going to do that step by step by step on here. All right, so first things first. You need a pointy Sharpie permanent marker. It's not on the supply list because they're very hard to find individually, and they're overpriced when you have to buy a whole packet that you'll never use. So I'm hoping you have some kind of a permanent marker laying around the house. Ideally the pointies, because they can't wash off. Next thing is, if you have a thicker one, we're going to write on this side, on the side. If you can't fit your pointy lettering on this narrow strip, you're going to have to use it on the side, but that's okay. Last resort, if you don't have a permanent marker, is take a piece of tape and use a good pen and write it on there really good, and then tape where we put these. So I just want to show you what we're doing here. Okay, this is exactly what we just did with the cardboard. Sorry, I'm holding the phone because I want you to see up close what I'm doing. We're basically duplicating this onto here. So everything we did here, like for example the yellow is 1, 2, 3 over on the top. So over here it's 1, 2, 3 over. And then you can see what I've done. Lay it flat so you can see. See how I've written very tiny pointy yellow on number 3. And then I travel over 1 and I put YO. You can also write yellow-orange, but if you're comfortable knowing what it is, you can put yellow-orange. Then I'm turning it so that all of them are written around. Since we turn our palette so many times, we don't want all of our lettering going in one direction. So pick one direction or the other and turn it, just so you can see these, because I'm going to have yellow, green, and then I'm skipping one, and then I have my green, and then I'm skipping one, and then I have my blue, green, and then I'm skipping one, and then my blue, skipping, and then blue, violet. We want to leave gaps in between. This one I crossed out the old lettering. So just if you are wondering, just click here. So here I have mud. And you can see how I'm going to write it really slowly. And if you take a picture of that cardboard or just have it on your screen, you can go with wherever it is on there will just match. This one's going to be violet, and you can put violet or purple. I like violet because I had the most amazing dog once named Violet. Okay, and then in the corner, black. I always write the whole thing out so I don't confuse it with blue. And then over here, so you can see I'm kind of going around. So that's the first stage. I'm going to end this here just so you can see what I've been doing up close. And we're just comparing it to that. And then I'm going to start the next process.